we are human wherever we go. That's just, we can't not be who we are. And a lot of my research and inspiration for founding Deep Space Predictive is recognizing that humanity. And this is a wonderful extension of having that conversation beyond the technical, beyond the research, and getting into the reality of who we are and what we take when we go into space. And I'm super excited to have Dr. Sian Proctor here with us today. She is Inspiration 4 mission pilot, a historic flight, becoming a commercial astronaut, being a pilot, and the first Black woman to be doing that, which is always exciting. And what's exciting for me is that she is a JEDI for space, justice, equality, diversity, inclusiveness. I have created a JEDI Council in one of my organizations. And so I'm so inspired by you, Dr. Proctor. So I'm so wanting to know that talk that you gave spurred some action into our Colorado Space Business Roundtable. So with that, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm just thrilled. It's great to see you again and being able to come and talk about my experience, but also the future of human spaceflight and how we're writing that narrative now, and how do we make that a JEDI space, and how do we keep that human element always present in our thinking. What's great about Star Harbor is it's a spaceflight training academy, basically. I like to think of it as your modern day Starfleet Academy. You remember you just saying how, this whole idea of how do you build and prepare people for the future of humanity permanently working, living, and playing in space. And so art and space, music, all the things, how do we bring, the humanity, the human part to space with us and keep that alive and thriving? But also, how do we solve for space equals solving for Earth?
Let me ask you a little bit, because this is, if you go on forums, you go on this spec, it actually really caught a lot of, the Twitterverse when Bezos sent up his team. What is the definition of an astronaut? Because there is that very question. I've heard everybody say, well, it's, if you got to go through NASA's whatever 72, 42-step process, that defines you as an astronaut. Or, you've at least got to have some training. What is the definition in your mind? And I also want to possibly link into the question of the fact that I think the term astronaut helps us keep the idea of human everywhere involved in the process, because of that Latin root of not, the fact that it takes an action to be involved, that you're part of the exploration. But I'd like to get your perspective.
Well, I just happened to pull up the definition because I like to use it. According to Oxford, the definition of an astronaut is a person who is trained to travel in a spacecraft. Interesting, right? Yeah. And so if you think about that, a person who's trained to travel in a spacecraft versus, the definition of, well, where is space? And so when we think of the Kármán line, and this is the definition of that, it is 100, let me get that straight. It is 54 nautical miles up, or 100 kilometers up above the Earth's surface, where we consider the amount of molecules, per square inch or whatever that is so minute that you're basically in the vacuum of space. And so there's this high idea of, the definition, you're training to go up in a spacecraft versus a line that you might have to cross to be considered in space and an astronaut. Now, what's interesting when we look at the history of NASA and astronauts, it was a selection process. You got selected to become an astronaut, and you began training. But training did not guarantee flight. But you still have, there's a lot of astronauts, NASA astronauts out there that never made it to space. And so when we're talking about defining, if we go by the traditional Oxford, if you've been training to go on a spacecraft mission, you could be considered an astronaut, right? but you don't get your astronaut wings until you've crossed what we call typically the Kármán line, which is that 100-kilometer mark.
One thing that's interesting is we want to inspire, and there's the argument of like, who gets to go? I guess one of my questions, would love your opinion on how do we inspire people to want to go? And how do we make it okay for those who will support us going, but really just don't want to go, you know, from a cultural perspective? Because there are some things that we have to honor that, you know, people have different relationships with space. And while we are like, let's all go, let's do this. Some cultures are like, no, but we'll support you. And how do we support them in supporting us with their no?
Oh, I totally agree. You know, and I think that, again, that's the storytelling aspect of human spaceflight, is making connections with people around the world and having conversations about who wants to go to space and why. And then also who doesn't want to go to space and why, and how do we support each other with these different viewpoints. But the whole point is that we all make that connection of the importance of why we need to go as humans to space, and why that is an endeavor worth supporting. And I think that for me, and when I think of a JEDI Space, the biggest issue is we don't have enough people of color and even women applying to be part of that space. When I was looking at, you know, the European Space Agency pushed out how many people applied for their astronaut selection process, which is happening right now. And they're the first ones to say, yeah, we will look at people with certain types of disabilities to be able to apply for the first time ever. But they broke it down by countries of how many women and men applied, and then how many got moved on to the second round. And the percent of just, you know, men to women, I would say it was still a quarter or less, typically women to men, you know, so 25% women to 75% men. And then they didn't get into the ethnic and, you know, racial breakdowns of those. But we have to have people being able to see themselves this as a career, or this is a thing that they want to do before we can have that JEDI space. And so one of the things that I've come back from my experience and wanting to share is talking to underrepresented communities and sharing my experience and my roadmap to get there, and why this is something worth pursuing, and that it's a long haul game.
And it's been such a wonderful conversation with you, Dr. Proctor, and we're gonna start to wrap up here. You know, we've talked about where we're going, who gets to go. Loved your poetry, like Jason said. That last line, I'm like, okay, it just sent chills, and it's so true. What are some last words you'd like to leave with us, and, you know, have us to be grounded but also think toward the stars?
Well, I think that brings in my last character, and that's Afro-Gaia. And so, and that's Mother Earth. And so Afro-Gaia is all about how, you know, she's watching. We all come from Africa. So this is talking about the Earth as a living system that is a part of us, and we're a part of it. But it's Afrocentric again, and the fact that humans came out of Africa, and what does that mean for the future? How do we be good stewards of Afro-Gaia, and or other words, Mother Earth, as we venture out into the stars? And so there's no better place than home. Starship Earth is number one, and everything we do out there needs to serve us back here, and making us into the utopian planet that we can be when we learn to cooperate and work together and strive for that JEDI space here on Earth.